Hello everyone, and welcome to class. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here for this explainer. Today, we're going to unlock something incredibly powerful. We're looking at the very foundations of how we think, how we reason, and ultimately, how we figure out what's actually true in the world. It's time to open up the Philosopher's Toolkit. Okay, let's dive into this and kick off our masterclass on how philosophers discover truth.
So here's our clear step-by-step journey for today's lecture. We've got 6 parts. First, philosophy, seeking the truth. Second, dialectics, arguing to learn. Third, ancient roots of debate. Fourth, testing hypotheses with logic. Fifth, the laws of logic. And finally, number 6, the rulebook of reasoning.
All right, moving right along to Module 1, Philosophy, Seeking the Truth.
You know, when you study something like chemistry or history, you're usually handed a massive textbook full of definitive, accepted facts. Well, philosophy is entirely different. It actually lives in the space of the unknown and the uncertain, and this brilliantly illustrates what the influential 20th century philosopher Bertrand Russell meant here. Basically, because we don't have definitive, easy answers to giant questions like, does God exist, or what's the meaning of life, we have to use reason to imagine alternative possibilities. We have to carefully trace the cascade of implications that come with changing just one of our core beliefs. So in this class, you kind of have to get used to the idea that your beliefs, well, they might just be wrong.
Which brings us right to Module 2, Dialectics, Arguing to Learn.
Now, if we're constantly evaluating our beliefs, we're definitely going to bump into people who see things differently, right? And naturally, that leads to arguments. But I want to completely debunk a huge myth right now. Philosophical arguments are not just loud, angry, contentious shouting matches. In popular culture, we're so used to debates. And debates, they're adversarial. It's all about aiming to win, using rhetorical ploys, and appealing to raw emotion. Philosophers, though, they prefer something called dialectics. In a dialectic, the folks having the discussion are not adversaries trying to crush each other. They're collaborators. They're working together, aiming for truth, relying strictly on logic and reason to trade in their false beliefs for actual knowledge.
And the way this works is through a continuous, iterative process called the dialectical loop. It starts simply. You ask a question. Someone offers an answer. Then the real work begins. Everyone collaborates to scrutinize that answer. Maybe they provide a counterexample that shows a flaw in the reasoning. Once they figure out exactly why it's flawed, they refine the answer. And then the loop repeats. Step by step, this brings everyone closer to the truth. And remember, even if you never reach a final perfect answer, the dialectical process itself has just as much value as the final destination.
Okay, let's head into Module 3, the ancient roots of debate.
So this dialectical method, it's not some modern invention. It actually has incredibly deep historical roots spanning all over the globe. If we trace it back, way back to around 1500 BCE, the Indian Vedic texts used dialogues between seekers of truth to explore fundamental concepts of reality. Early Buddhist texts focused heavily on analogical reasoning in their public assemblies. And then, skipping straight over to classical Greece around 400 BCE, we've got Socrates and Plato pioneering Greek dialogue, which eventually paved the way for Aristotle to formally systematize logic.
Let's zoom in on how sophisticated this early reasoning really was. Take a look at this highly structured analogical argument from the classical Indian text, the Karaka Samhita. It's a brilliant 5-step process. 1. The claim. They say the soul is eternal. 2. The reason. Because it is unproduced. 3. The example. Space is an example of something unproduced, and space is eternal. 4. The application. Just as space is unproduced, so is the soul. And finally, 5. The conclusion. Therefore, the soul is eternal. By schematizing their reasoning exactly like this, these early philosophers were able to take their private thoughts and expose them to rigorous public testing.
Over in ancient Greece, Socrates was also a massive champion of this active, public testing of ideas. In fact, he never wrote anything down. He famously favored live dialectics over writing. As this quote points out, Socrates basically considered books to be dead discourse. Why? Well, because you can't argue with a book. If you question it, it just signifies the very same thing forever. It just stares back at you. Socrates wanted to Socratically question live people, exposing their false beliefs and guiding them to discover the truth independently. He knew you literally have to do the mental work yourself.
All right, moving into Module 4, Testing Hypotheses with Logic.
Now let's shift to the practical application phase of our masterclass. How do we actually take these ancient tools and use them to test our modern reality? Well, I want you to picture this.
You come home from class and once again, your outside potted plant is knocked over on your porch. Ask yourself, why is your plant often knocked over? I want you to think about how your brain instantly tries to solve this everyday mystery.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how your brain instinctively jumps into action. It instantly generates a hypothesis, which is simply a proposed explanation for an observed process or phenomenon. You look at the dirt on the porch and think, I bet the wind knocked it over. Boom, you've just formulated a hypothesis. But simply coming up with an explanation isn't enough to give us actual knowledge. We have to test it.
And this is exactly where logic plays an absolutely crucial role. To test our idea, we formulate an if-then conditional statement. Something like, if it's windy, then my plant will get knocked over. Next, we keep a log of windy days, and we cross-check that with the days the plant is knocked over. Now pay attention here. If the plant falls over on a perfectly still, windless day, well, logic demands that we reject or refine our hypothesis. Maybe an animal is knocking it over. Logic is what dictates every single step of this process.
Let's look at Module 5, the laws of logic.
You see, logic, much like physics or math, has inescapable laws. These act as the fundamental rules of thought, and arguably of reality itself. First up is the law of non-contradiction. This states that contradictory propositions cannot be true in the same sense at the same time. Aristotle actually considered this the most certain of all principles. And honestly, without it, knowledge, reasoning, and even language just wouldn't be possible at all.
Let me give you a fun, real-world analogy using the textbook author's dog, Josie. Take a look at this statement. Josie the dog is on her bed and Josie is not on her bed. At first glance, that's an obvious contradiction, right? It can't be true at the same time. But what if Josie is just lounging, half on and half off the bed? Is she on or off? This is exactly why the qualifier in the same sense is incredibly vital. If we strictly define on the bed as meaning at least 50% of her body is on the mattress, then we have to stick to that exact definition. If her body is 50% on, she is on the bed, making the statement that she is not on her bed definitively false.
So the crucial point is that if we accept the law of non-contradiction, we must also logically accept the law of the excluded middle. This rule tells us that for any statement, either that statement is true or its negation is true. There's no sneaky middle ground here. Using our strict definitions, either Josie the dog is on the bed right now or she isn't. It's a binary reality that frames all of our rational thought.
Finally, we've arrived at Module 6, the Rulebook of Reasoning. Okay, so we know the laws of logic, but why are we compelled to follow these rules in the first place? Why does logic hold such authority? Read this sentence right here. Lulu is 5 feet tall and Lulu is 7 feet tall. I mean, come on, this is an absurd contradiction. If your friend Lulu actually said this to you, you'd think she was joking. Do you think Lulu actually believes this? More importantly, even if she somehow did, she absolutely should not believe it.
And that should not brings us to a concept called normativity. Normativity is the assumption that certain actions or beliefs are good and ought to be pursued. It's a standard to which we ought to conform. Think about it like this. Ethics is normative because it tells us how we ought to act in the world. Well, logic is normative because it tells us how we ought to think. Logic is literally the constitutive norm of reasoning itself. Without these logical norms, our thoughts would just be completely chaotic, and we wouldn't even be able to categorize concepts. Logic makes thinking possible.
And that brings me to a final challenge for all of you today. We've built up your Philosopher's Toolkit. We've seen how dialectics help us trade false beliefs for real knowledge, and how the inescapable laws of logic govern reality. So, what does this all mean for us? Well, I want to leave you with this provocative thought. Take a hard look at your own worldview. Are your own beliefs logically consistent? Or are you, maybe, holding on to some contradictions? I challenge you to take these new tools, rigorously test your own mind, and see what truths you discover.